Gentle Ben, Chapter 10. They came at 10 o'clock in the morning, 3 of the town's leading businessmen and 3 women who were active in the Orca City School. They sat stiff and uncomfortable in the Anderson living room, waiting for the spokesman, Mayor Henry Beckett, to state their business. Henry Beckett was a thin, wispy little man in a spotless business suit. He owned the combined dry goods and hardware store. "Carl, Mrs. Anderson," he inclined his head at Ellen, "we're here on a rather unpleasant mission." He cleared his throat and looked about at the others with him. "Yes, Henry," Carl Anderson said. "You know about last night, of course. Benson will live, but his face will be badly scarred. It would not have happened if that gang had kept away from Ben in the shed." "No question about that, Carl. And Benson provoked the bear. You know that, too," Anderson said. "I agree with you completely, Carl. Unfortunately, how it happened and why isn't important now. The important thing is, it did happen, and it's made the whole town aware of what it means to have such an animal so close. It could happen again, and with fatal results. We want to avoid that, and I know you do too." "How would you avoid it, Henry?" Anderson asked. "You're putting me in an awkward position." "Well, I'd like to know how you'd do it." Henry Beckett fidgeted uncomfortably. He did not enjoy this particular duty. "Well," he said, "if you were down in the States or near a big city, you could give the bear to a city park or perhaps sell him somewhere. Up here, it seems to us, all you can do is turn him loose or dispose of him. Frankly, we're not in favor of turning him loose. If he were a wild brown bear, he'd go off into the hills to get away from people as other brownies do. Unfortunately, he's not wild, at least he doesn't fear people." "By dispose, you mean shoot him, don't you?" Ellen asked. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson," Henry Beckett said. "Why all this fuss about a bear?" a plump woman asked. "Yes, a bear." Spots of color glowed in Ellen's smooth cheeks. "But he happens to be Mark's pet, Mrs. Peters." Mrs. Peters sniffed. "Why didn't you get him a dog if he had to have a pet? My Frank has a dog." "You would not understand." Ellen's brown eyes, almost black with anger, looked over the 3 men and 3 women who sat in judgment on Ben. "You're not talking about just any bear now. You're talking about a tame bear, our son's pet, which he loves as much as any of you children love their dogs or cats or whatever pets they have." "You can get another pet," one of the women ventured, "and at least our children's pets aren't endangering other people's lives." Henry Beckett said quickly, "We did not come here to fight or try to bully you and Mrs. Anderson, Carl. We're here simply as a committee of citizens to try to work out a solution to a touchy problem. I know the bear is a pet. I also know that you and Mrs. Anderson," he bobbed his head at Ellen again, "as fair-minded people can see our point. It's like having a dangerous criminal outside your door with him so close to town. We don't want to force a solution on you, and we certainly don't want to take drastic action ourselves. We'd like you to resolve this in your own way." "You aren't leaving me such much of a way," Anderson said. "I realize that," Henry Beckett agreed. "We were hoping you might have something in mind." Anderson shook his head. "This has been a surprise to me, too, you know." Ellen asked, "How long will you give us to think it over before you take drastic action?" We thought a couple days. I'm afraid the town's not inclined to wait much longer." "That's right," Mrs. Peters said in a positive voice. "I'm scared right now to let Frank out of the house." She looked at the 2 other women, and they nodded in agreement. "You wouldn't consider a new shed and stouter chain?" Anderson asked. "For this particular bear, no," Henry Beckett said. "Accidents can happen, Carl, and he's just too big, and it's too close to town." "I see. You said 2 days?" "We thought about that should be ample time," Henry said. "I'm sorry, Carl. I'm really, really sorry." He bobbed his head at Ellen. "Mrs. Anderson, I think we'd better go." When they were alone, Ellen's eyes were bright with tears and anger. "That's Mrs. Peters. Why all this fuss about a bear?" she mimicked. "Oh," she clenched her fist. "We didn't put up much of a fight for Mark and Ben. What's wrong with us?" "Well, they were right, and we know it," Carl said savagely. "Turn it around and we'd feel the same." "And what can we do?" "You heard Beckett. He had all the answers, right down to who pulls the trigger." "There must be another way." "Wait, Carl, please wait." "Of course," Anderson said gently. "I don't enjoy the prospect of shooting Ben, but I've been fearing and dreading something like this We've got 2 days' grace, but, so help me, I don't know what good it can do us. 2 days, Ellen said. Let's use it all. It's not fair that Mark and Ben should suffer for some stupid trick of Fog Benson's. Ask Clearwater. Ask Mr. Kelly. Maybe they have some idea. Carl discussed it with Clearwater, and after an hour, during which they discussed every idea that came to mind, Clearwater shoved back his beret and shook his head. I hate to admit it, but Henry Beckett gave you the only answer. I guess so. Anderson wandered down the dock to talk with Mike Kelly. They sat in the office. Kelly, chin buried in a big palm, shook his head. Like I said this morning, I'm afraid that last night we just postponed the inevitable. The more I've thought about it, the more sure I am. If you think of anything that might help, let me know. I'll do that, Kelly said, and gravely watched Carl leave. That night, Carl and Mark went up to the shed to see Ben. He was awake, so Mark ran down to the northern fishery and brought up some bread and another salmon. Mark sat beside his father against the wall and watched Ben eat. Finally, Mark turned to his dad and said, Dad, can they do anything to Ben because of last night? The kids have been talking. Mark's lips tightened some. Their folks are sort of mad. A couple talked about shooting Ben. They couldn't, could they, Dad? I've been meaning to talk with you about that. This is a good place with just the two of us. His father was using his man-to-man voice. He'd used it a lot this summer aboard the boat. I want you to listen and try to understand. You're getting to be quite a young man. You can understand this. People are more than mad, Mark. They're afraid. And fear's the worst thing. It makes people take drastic action to protect themselves. Last night suddenly made the whole town realize that Ben is a full-grown brown bear, capable of killing a man. And he is, just a block from town, held by a chain he could probably break, in a shed that he can walk right through. It's a frightening thought. It wouldn't have happened if Fog Benson and those mean men had left him alone. But it did happen, and it's made the people conscious of Ben's bigness and nearness. They won't tolerate it, son, and when a town decides something, you gotta go along because for the good of all, they have the right to take things into their own hands. And for the good of all, they say Ben has to go. But Ben's not mean if you don't do things like Fog did. We know that. Orca City doesn't know that. A committee came up this morning and told us to get rid of Ben. You wouldn't let him take him away, would you, Dad? I've been trying all day to figure out another way. Well, what way, Dad? I don't have any ideas yet. We could build a stronger shed, Mark suggested. Nothing much of wood will hold Ben long. You no idea how much power there is in him. We could get a bigger chain. Yeah, but he'd still be too close to town. And an accident could happen that would let him loose. The town people won't go for it. We gotta do something, Mark was suddenly frightened. Think of something. Dad, please, please think of something. I'm trying, Mark. Remember. His father dropped a hand on his knee. I'm on your side all the way. I don't want anything to happen to Ben either. Do you understand? Yes, Dad. Good. Now let's go home. And don't mention this to your mama. Those people upset her pretty bad this morning. We'll work that out ourselves. They went down the dark trail together, his father's hands on his shoulder. Mark felt comforted by the tall, strong figure beside him. His father had said he was on his side. That dispelled all fear. Nothing could stand against his father. He could do anything. He would find a way to save Ben. Mark's mom met them at the door. There were spots of color in her cheeks and her eyes were shining. She said in a rush, Carl, Mr. Kelly has brought Arnie Nichols to see you. Mr. Nichols has a solution for Ben. Mark would have followed his father into the living room where Kelly and Nichols were, but his mom stopped him. This is men talk, she said. You stay in the kitchen with me. You can listen from here. Mark sat where he could look into the room and listened intently. Mike Kelly said, Arnie knows your problem, Carl. He has a suggestion I think you'd better hear. Arnie Nichols was in his 30s, a thin, nervous man with pale eyes that were never still, black snags of teeth that showed when he smiled. He had a big old boat, the Hustler. People said it was well named because Arnie kept it busy at anything that would turn a profit. Arnie said, now, I'm heading for Ketchikan, Alaska tomorrow, putting the Hustler in dry dock for an overhaul. If you can fix up some kind of cage for that bear, I got an extra long boom and I can lift him aboard. On the way, I'll put him ashore on one of the outside islands. I know a couple where the bank drops right off. I can lay in close and with my long boom swing the crate ashore, open it, and let him out. Mark's father said, "That's a great idea, Arnie. What's this going to cost me?" Nichols spread his hands, showing his snags of teeth. "A favor for a friend. Maybe you can do one for me someday." "You say you're leaving tomorrow," Carl said. "That only gives me tonight to build a cage. That's not much time." "I've got 2x6 timbers at the cannery, bolts, hinges, and tools," Kelly said, "and we can turn on the floodlights to work. You and Clearwater and I can knock together a cage that will hold Ben." "All right," Mark's father said. "I'll get Clearwater and I'll be at the cannery in an hour." He held out his hand to Arnie Nichols. "Arnie, I appreciate this." "A favor." Arnie showed his snags again. After they'd gone, Mark's father came into the kitchen and said, "Arnie's no friend of mine, and he never did a favor before in his life." Kelly must have twisted his arm. Being the superintendent who buys Arnie's fish, he can do that for sure. Kelly's behind this generous offer. "Who cares?" Mark's mother said happily. "Ben won't be shot, and he'll be free. Isn't that wonderful, Mark?" "No!" Mark cried. "No! You're not going to let him take Ben away, are you, Dad?" "Yes, I am," his father said. "This is a solution that's dropped out of the sky." "But Ben is mine." "He's all mine." Carl Anderson threw up his hands. "I don't have time to argue with you. This is the way it has to be." He looked at Ellen. "You explain it to him and make him see there's no other way. He's got to accept. No compromises, no changes." And then Dad was gone.